How's it going, YouTube? Happy Monday. Hopefully you are having a good one today, because depending on your view of the world, there actually is some good news floating around out there. The first bit of good news has nothing whatsoever to do with trucking directly, but it is good news for everyone who is a climate change skeptic, and also for rational people when it comes to climate change and the environment. And that news is that apparently over a recent 2-year period, I think it was 2022 to 2024, or 2020 to 2022, something like that, I don't know, maybe, 20, I think it was 22 to 24. Anyway, a certain Antarctic ice shelf gained 200 billion tons of ice, which apparently is a major surprise to a lot of scientists. And they attribute this sudden growth in ice to heavier than previously recorded precipitation in Antarctica, which accumulated more snow, which of course means more ice. And now we got 200 billion more tons of ice on a shelf that was previously thought, I guess, I could be wrong, I could be misquoting, so look this up for yourself. This is a documented news article. You can find this is not hiding anywhere. This ice shelf was previously thought to be collapsing, in danger, not doing well, things going very poorly. I don't know the ins and outs. I didn't retain enough of the article to speak about it, and I'm only using that article as a reference to set up my next joke, because it is a possibility that hell is starting to freeze over, and therefore we're going to get more ice at both of the poles, south and north, in a preparation for a great planetary freeze. Because the other bit of news from yesterday, now carrying over into this morning, is that U.S. and Chinese trade delegations that met in Switzerland have reached some sort of a deal. And the result of that is that both nations are massively reducing tariffs on each other as negotiations continue for the next 90 days. So for the next 90 days, tariffs are cratering. Now, they're not going away, as far as I can tell. I didn't read the whole kit and caboodle on this. It's just there's going to be a reduction in tariffs for 90 days while more talking happens, which is good news, because that does influence trucking, because all of a sudden that should mean that a great number of ships from China will be setting sail for the U.S., which will in turn mean that the ports on the West Coast, especially San Diego, Washington State, more accurately, San Diego, San Francisco, LA, Oakland, and ports on the Oregon or whatever how you pronounce it coasts, and then the Washington State coast up in Puget Sound. All of those ports are about to get a lot busier. If they've been dead or quiet, I have no idea. The doomers have been saying that all the ports on the West Coast are just dead, no one's working. I have no idea what's true or false, I don't know. But in theory, there is a strong likelihood that a great deal of freight will be coming into U.S. ports, which in turn will probably lead to a short summer boom in west to east freight coming out of those ports, which will probably keep not just the port truckers operational, but also the guys who run I-20, I-40. Those guys will be able to sustain their business models. So in theory, there's a great deal to celebrate there. That we've got some positive momentum happening. Some cooler heads are prevailing. There's discussion. There's talk. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a whole lot that needs to get worked out between the U.S. and China when it comes to trade deficit, manufacturing, job loss, exports from the U.S. to China. There's a lot more, fair trade opportunities and, deals and so forth like that. But all of that is way above my pay grade. I'm just here to make a couple of jokes and share what I think is some good news. I'm sure some guys who are much more in tune with the freight markets and who really understand this stuff a lot better than I do have already put out videos on the subject, and they've already been saying it's good or it's just a stopgap solution before the real disaster comes or whatever. Personally, I do not expect this short-term goodwill to be anything but short-term. I do expect there to be some sort of accusation of breach of agreement between the U.S. and China, or talks to break down and tariffs to resume at a higher level. Will it be 145%? Don't know, but I do expect tariffs on Chinese imports to go back up at least to 50 to 75%, probably as high as 100% or more. But what shape that will take, I don't know, because we're still very early, in my opinion, in this game. This is not going to be over, in time for kickoff, as it were. We still got a long way to go for all these negotiations and for a real bilateral trade agreements to be hammered out that doesn't screw over American businesses, creates opportunities for exports to China, but also, continues to support, the cheap labor and horrible human rights violations of the PRC in order for them to export their wares to the world at a much reduced price than can be produced domestically. So, we'll see what the end result ends up actually being, but it's a step in the right direction. It is going to be some short-term good news for a lot of small businesses, a lot of truckers, especially the solo owner-operators like myself. It's going to be a bit of a breath of relief here because, I contract also with JB Hunt for power only from time to time, and, they do a lot of freight, and JB Hunt is a major mover of freight in the U.S. They do a lot of intermodal, a ton of dedicated freight, and then of course they filter some of their extra stuff out to the OTR boys, the power only guys. So there was only going to be a little bit more time before their freight volumes would be affected, and less and less freight would end up coming to the power only market or to the JB Hunt OTR boards. So this is a lot of good news, at least in theory. We will see what the end result actually ends up being, but for the time being, let's just breathe a sigh of relief. Let's take this with a happy grain of salt here and hope that it means some good business for all of us as we enter into the summer season. And with that being said, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you down